If you're not learning how to love what your lover loves, then it's all about you, and nothing's actually gonna happen. You're just mining. You're just taking what you want, manipulating the situation to like get your desired outcome.
Yeah.
That's not a relationship.
Hi, my name is Dave, and this is the Light Forest Podcast, a journey of exploration to bring more light into how we live and regenerate our planet. In Season 0, join me for conversations with changemakers from around the world as we dive deep into areas such as Asian philosophy, indigenous knowledge, regenerative economics, spirituality, and more, searching for the interconnected roots to the many crises engulfing our planet, from war and digital technology governance to climate and health. Tuning into this podcast, you will hear from thinkers and builders helping us transition away from the dark forest paradigm of infinite extraction, fear, and violence we live in today. You will also hear guests share their own inner journeys of regeneration and unlearning to live more authentic lives. My own journey has spanned think tanks and the private sector, taking me from Bombay to Rhode Island, Shanghai to Chiang Mai. I am a recognized thinker and convener in the space of technology, law, and policy in Asia. So join me on a journey to see our world and our own selves with an open mind, and let us create a light forest world. Mother Earth is sick. The air, the water, the soil, everything polluted. We know this. We breathe it, we drink it, we eat it. We're sick too. Mental health, cancer, chronic diseases. Everyone is sick. In an interconnected world, how can we find the roots of our sickness? Where do they lie? Perhaps we have to start with seed. The source of life starts from a seed. Seeds hold within them nutrition, genetic history, ancient memory. Yet today we live in a world where 95% of our seed diversity has been systematically killed off by industrial farming over the past few decades. Do we know what this means for our bodies and our minds, and for Mother Earth? Most of us city creatures of modernity live lives severed from land. We live disconnected. We live as dismembered selves, grasping for meaning in this meaning crisis. We've forgotten what it means like to be in a loving relationship with our planet. To live in right relation is to be in an intimate relationship with the ecology of life where you reside. It is to know the types of plants that provide nutrition and healing, the habits of the animals, and to hold deep reverence and gratitude for the life they enable. When was the last time your feet touched the earth? According to Gregory, who we journey with today, all of our ailments, in one way or another, are related to our severed relationship with food and the soil that grows our food. This story goes far, far deeper than just nutrition and bodily health. It goes right into the seed of the human story and our understandings of ourselves. Who we are, why are we here, what does it mean to live in relationship with life? Greg is a remarkable human being whom I first met some months ago during a course at the Panpan Eco Village and Seed Saving Bank around Chiang Mai. He's been a resident of Panpan for over 10 years, where he lives with his wife Rampai and young daughter Surya. He also writes a newsletter on Substack called Hirate, Post-Activism in the Anthropocene. As you'll hear with Greg, everything is about story, and he shares several stories about the name of his newsletter and how that connects with his own ancestry. In this conversation, Greg talks to us about the sacredness of seed, going deep, deep into the roots of why seed animates life and why understanding the ills of our planet and the many problems we have are connected to seed. Greg describes the ills of modernity and how our systems of today have gradually severed our relationship with land, and how we no longer live in right relation, which, as he shares with us, is so critical for us to retain balance on this planet and to find our own sense of purpose and happiness in this life. Greg shares some of the deep indigenous wisdoms that he's had a chance to learn from various teachers that he's encountered and had in his life. He shares with us stories from mythology. And as you'll hear, Greg is a natural storyteller in every way. Weaved in this conversation is his own journey from the Midwest in the US to Thailand and the many paths along the way that have led him to where he is today. This is the first podcast recording I've done in person. I really enjoyed it. I had the chance to sit in Greg's balcony of his home, an adobe home that he and his wife and friends and community built together on his wedding night. Greg sat with me for nearly 2 hours, and so I've decided to split the conversation in 2 parts. So the next part will be published next Sunday, but for now, strap in, sit down, grab a cup of tea or a coffee. If you're driving a car, get ready, because this is going to be a really, really deep conversation that goes into the heart, into the seed of life. And while there's several deep emotions that may arise, there's also a seed of hope that you'll hear from Greg. A hope embedded in nature's creative potential.
And welcome to the Light Forest Podcast, a journey of exploration to bring more light into how we live and regenerate our planet. And I have to say, this is the first time we're recording in a bit of a forest, so it's finally happening.
Yeah.
And this time, listeners, you may hear sounds of birds and other animal sounds that will come in, and I think this is nice to not be in a studio environment and to actually be out in nature. And I'm joined today by Gregory Pettis. Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. You might hear the sound of my daughter too.
Actually, before we even go into this, let me try to go into. It's about 10 a.m. Right now in the morning.
Yep.
What's been your morning like from waking up until now?
Well, first I greeted the sun. That's the first thing I do every morning. I walk outside my house here and say thank you to the Father Sun for all the work he's doing for us, and try to offer a blessing to him. Not to ask for anything, but to just give praise and thanks, and try to do a little bit to remember and just set my day, I don't know, in some sort of mythological alignment, so that I don't start racing to the phone to freak out about politics or anything. But on that note, I'm well aware of a lot of the things going on. A lot of my fellow countrymen back in what is currently referred to as the United States are in an interesting place.
Yeah, we are recording on the inauguration day.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Trump just became president again. And on top of that, Leonard Peltier, who is the longest political prisoner, I think, ever, was just freed. It was Biden's final thing. So I was connecting with some of my friends about that and rejoicing, because that's been a constant part of my journey. Just that brought me to a lot of activist work and just stories with Native Americans in my youth, and this seems like a big deal, a really big deal for many. And it's interesting, there's a lot of grief, but a lot of praise and joy at this time. So we had breakfast. There's a big, we always have these volunteers and workshops going on here. We have a big workshop right now, so hosting that with there's probably 75 people at Pun Pun currently learning about adobe building and organic gardening and how to build community and how to make natural medicine and, raise children, homeschooling, all those things. So orchestrating all those things.
Wow, I love that. I mean, that's starting your morning with the sun and just remembering, in a sense, of your purpose for the day. I love that. There's so many directions to take this conversation, and I myself am curious about many things. But I thought maybe the one thing to start off is seed.
Yeah.
It could be the seed of this conversation as well, symbolically, but also like seed as something that I feel like animates a lot of your thinking and your work.
Yeah, right on. That's it. that's everything. That's the whole thing. 1,000 things just shot into my heart and mind as you said that, as it always does. There's a lot of gratitude and reverence in my whole essence for seed. And it's all relatively new. I grew up in a very sterile, relatively privileged, white, Midwest environment where all our food was generally from boxes, and, I didn't have a relationship with my food, and certainly not with seed, but because of a lot of my seed teachers, who that comes to my mind too. I definitely need to reference and honor my teachers, mainly Martin Prechtel, who is a seed saver, not just a saver of seed, but a saver of culture and story and myth. And, he, by chance and chaos, we crossed paths, and then similarly across paths with John Dai, who's the founder of Pun Pun Farm. And, a lot of different meandering streams converged here. An interest in social activism and Buddhism, incidentally. I was taking, younger college students to different parts of Asia to learn about Buddhism about 12 or so years ago. And I heard about this man, John Dai, who was working with seed. And I had noticed when I was in South Asia that although there was a lot of focus on religion in South Asia, primarily Buddhism where we were, to help create kind of a global ethic for peace, what really held people together was seed. And society, villages and places that I went throughout India and Nepal, places like this that had a deep understanding, a mythological relation with seed, were the strongest. And it spoke to me deeply, especially coming from the West where I didn't even know what seed was. But, fast forward, I hear about Joe, I come to Pun Pun, and my mind was just blown and my heart ripped open. And a lot of questions seemed to have an answer, maybe not an answer, but a more, offered a riddle that I could work with. And whatever it was, whether it was like, this concern about the direction culture is heading, the direction our relation with the land is heading, food, medicine, clothing, shelter, all of it has to do with seed. And that became really clear when I was with John Dai and also Martin Prechtel. So, yes, Pun Pun, where we are now, this unintentional eco-village. We kind of work abstractly without much clear design. Anyone in this community, you ask what is Punpun, they'll give you a different answer. But the unifying thread has to do with a reverence and appreciation, a commitment to keeping seeds alive.
So you mentioned this grief of that you went through. I mean, I recently learned that 95% of seed variety is dead. Can you maybe walk us through just the state of what this means? I think definitely I feel like I'm still trying to fully appreciate what does it really mean that this is the state.
Yeah. Thank you for anchoring us into that. Sometimes I forget to cover the basics. And that is a real truth that it talk about grief. It's terrifying how many people are unaware of this. And the reason that people are unaware of that is quite deliberate. My daughter and I just read the Lorax last night. you know this story?
I don't know.
Dr. Seuss? Oh, yeah, you got to read the Lorax about these people making all this money off of selling air. And, the way they got to do what they did was because they made sure no one in the village knew about anything that was happening, ever, And that's what's happening in the world today. You've got these giant corporations, CP Group here in Asia, Monsanto all over the world, throughout India and the Americas. And, there's just a handful of players controlling all our food, controlling all our medicine. And they're genetically modifying all seeds. They're deliberately destroying heirloom cultural seeds so that we get to a point where the only way we can survive is by consuming what they provide us with. And most of us are not farming anymore in the modern world, so we're totally detached from that narrative. But we're still, suffering from that reality. And you can see it all around us with the increasing sicknesses that we see. More cancer, more diabetes, all of this is related to that. The seeds that are being provided are not natural seeds. They grow in relationship to chemicals, and they do not provide the kind of nutrition that the other 95% of seeds that was here did provide. And this is how it happened very quickly with the onset of, the so-called Green Revolution.
It seems shocking that 95%.
95%.
That doesn't happen overnight.
Well, it did happen overnight because modernity is amazingly powerful, and we should be respectful of it in that sense, I think a lot of people, good-hearted, well-intended people just want to rage against the machine, but there is something to recognize. There's an intelligence in this strange, fast-moving phenomena of modernity. It's shifting thousands and thousands of years of wisdom, culture, and relation to land, relation with each other, relation with ancestors, and the foresight to live for a time beyond now. Overnight, one generation, 10 years. Since I've lived in Thailand, everything has changed. I've only been here 10 years. It's a completely different reality here than when I first moved here, Most of the farmers in our village are just as forgetful as anyone else. Yeah. It's amazing. It happens very quickly. 95%. Yeah. But the good news is that it all comes from somewhere, right? And that place where that 900%, whatever, all of the wild diversity that was here used to not be here a long time ago. It came from somewhere. So that place that we used to honor mythically, ritually, symbolically, with all the, the human capacity to generate story, that place is still there, So it can come back. It won't look like what it did before. But yeah, that number can be quite devastating. But it's good to remember that change happens, decay happens, things rise and fall. This is definitely human created. We're not off the hook. Yeah. And it behooves us to get back into that place of feeding the sun.
Yeah, I think what I like about that message is embedded in there is this understanding that the nature has this creative, regenerative power. And that while our minds sometimes look at a 95% figure and says like that seems out. I mean, you read reports today of climate change and like things like we've reached past the point. And sometimes I see these statistics. I'm like, who says we've reached past the point? Like it's a bunch of human scientists studying this data, but there's this vast unknowingness, that creative potential that created all of this.
Yes.
And maybe it's like remembering into that story.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You and I have chatted about this idea of intact peoples, and there's a few left. People who do have a deep relation with their past, their relation with land, and understanding of how we hold to agreements that keep life living. Know that. And it's in us, but modernity is certainly feeding that part of us that remains ignorant and fearful.
A big question that I have with this light forest journey of exploration is, to find the seed of where it all went wrong as well, or searching for the roots. I do read a lot of people, and oftentimes people put their finger on modernity, on maybe the point of the Enlightenment period in Europe, where this idea of the individual self became stronger. How do you see where things started to deviate from your understanding?
I don't know if I really know. I think I went down a big rabbit hole for a long time, going crazy trying to answer that, and then I kind of came to a point where I don't know. I don't know if it really even necessarily matters. It happens, and the need to know everything is kind of a product of modernity too. It's like there's an element of chaos in the universe, and that just is, and again, I think in most, any intact culture I know of knows that, and even in like more modern religions, they generally tell tales of that, like Shiva's cosmic dance, and like, there's all these elements of destruction that occur, even in the Christian story, I don't know if it matters that we know why. It might be more beneficial to just observe what is. It happens, Forgetfulness is part of the journey.
Yeah.
And like the story you and I got to journey with together about the boy who forgot his lover, who was the goddess who gave all life.
Yeah, why did you pick that story for us? Because you used that story in the program that we did together, and I found it so powerful. What led you to choose that story in your work?
Because that was the story I was given permission to share. Yeah, and I feel like for me, especially in this world where we have so much access to information, people just take what they want, like someone has a good experience with ayahuasca and then all of a sudden they're pouring ayahuasca, That seems rude to me. You have to really know it. I've been blessed to have a great, my teacher, Martin Pechtel, he tells great stories. He told me that story. He told me other stories, but that one he said I could share. And one thing I've heard again and again from different cultures that my wife and I have been honored to build relation over the years is permission is very important, and respecting when someone says no. So there's other stories I could have shared, but the people who told them to me told me I can't. So I don't, That was the story that my teacher said I could share. So that's why I shared that one. But there's lots of stories like that, There's so many. Like that is a story I've it's amazing how many times I've come across other stories and I'm like, oh, that's kind of the same story, But it all comes down to this recognition that at some point we forgot. It doesn't always say why or how, That's because I think there's different reasons for that, Usually it has to do with you get so good at what you're doing that you start to think you're doing it.
You forget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not doing anything, The sun is doing all this. The soil, you know.
And stories have played, and myths and stories have played roles for generations in helping us remember. Yet, I feel like maybe these days, when I read these same stories, they seem so high on symbolism that they mean something deeper. Yet we don't get to see them.
My friends are building my toys up because they tear it fall down.
Oh, that's okay.
They're building it beautiful than last night.
That's great.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
that's a prime example, isn't it? You know, things get destroyed and then we build them up again. Hopefully more beautiful than before. Lovely. See, the kids know.
Yeah, the kids haven't forgotten yet.
Yeah.
You mentioned this one story that you have permission to share about the raggedy boy. But just in cultures around the world, like these stories and myths. I mean, I come from India, a land of so many stories.
So many.
But I'll be very frank and honest with you and everyone listening, is that I grew up reading them stories, like Ramayana, but I didn't understand the symbolism behind it. I didn't understand the deep stories of the universe and life that they were trying to tell.
Yeah.
And there was nobody around me to tell me that either. And at some point, they just became just like Batman and Robin and just a bunch of superheroes doing magical things that someone, dreamt up.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can serve as both, an obstacle and even a means for resentment, agitation, but also a means for hope. Like a lot of times when you like tap into this, you're like, oh, it's all dead, it's all gone. But actually, it's all right there. Like in those stories, it's still there. It's just you have to learn how to see it, It's like Disney and, yeah, for sure. You see all these comic books about, the Ramayana, or, you see them in Thailand too, 7-Elevens, chock full of these, pop culture versions of Buddha, but he's like this superhero. And you can look at that and be like, oh, this is so lame. But actually, it's a miracle it's still there at all. It could be nothing, which is what we're heading towards, and we need to prevent that from happening. But it's still there. And that's why one of the reasons I think India is so fascinating. It's like, it may be all like diluted, but it's still there. And so there's that 5% of the seed is still alive, which means you can peel back the layers and look at what's actually in there. Yeah. Yeah, I hear you, and it's wonderful that something seems to have happened for you personally, where you're suddenly like, oh, maybe I should go back and check that out.
Yeah.
Same for me. I grew up with a lot of, basically resentment, disgust for the Christian story. I was like, this is merely a vehicle for dominating culture all over the world. Yeah. This is just a vehicle for colonization. And so I just loathed it.
Yeah.
But luckily, by chance and chaos, I don't know, karma, who knows? Hard to say. Jury's still out on all that. But I met some really amazing Christians who I'm like, oh, I should review these stories again. There's incredible stories in the Bible that are loaded with magic.
Tell me a little bit more about then what your journey was like. You mentioned getting to Thailand 10 years ago. India's been there as well. Tell me about this journey of your remembering and getting from this stage to where you are now.
I don't know. Again, like anymore, I'm really aware of just chaos and chance. Like, I don't know. Again, I don't know. Maybe it's karma. We're all kind of thrown into this life and moving along. But I definitely grew up in a very different world. My parents were like Salvation Army officers. If you're familiar with the Salvation Army, so
the thrift shops.
Yes, yeah. So very like socially engaged Christians, basically. And so were working. They were working to feed the hungry and serve the poor, and but heavily focused on the evangelical Western, understanding of the Christ. But because of rock and roll and music and arts, I started being like, what's out there? I started traveling around like a hippie with these rock and roll bands, Grateful Dead and whatnot, and traveled. So traveling is a huge part of it. You start to see, think, smell, feel. You're like, oh, what's this? What's that? What's that? And I loved it. I went, and I was way into hip hop. I went to a hip hop concert where the Beastie Boys and the one of the MCs, the rappers, was practicing Tibetan Buddhist, and I'd never heard of that before, but I really liked him. I was like, what's that all about? And then there were Tibetan Buddhist monks at this concert. I was like, who are they? Their robes, and they had this incredible smile, and just, it's like, wow, what is this, And that's what really was the seed of like, I got to learn more about this. And that's when I went down I ate everything I could about Asian philosophy. The Tao, Tibetan Buddhism, Thich Nhat Hanh, all the pop stars of India, and Ram Dass and all this and that. But, one thing leads to another, and you end up taking Buddhist vows, and I ended up traveling to Tibet and India.
And you were also an academic at this point? Or you were... what was the relations with academia?
Yeah, so so there was, there were several meandering streams. So I was an educator. So within sociology. So definitely coming into all this with that framework. I mean, that was a bit after, because I was already into Buddhism because of being a hippie in high school. But then I went to university in Colorado, and I was focusing on environmental studies and sociology. But when you do that...
Seeds were being planted.
Seeds were being planted.
Yeah.
And so when you do that in Colorado, that usually cannot be done without a dash of mountain culture, because it's mountains there. And where we are, in where I was in Crested Butte, there was a lot of Tibetans living there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because they were refugees, because of the diaspora.
Planting their seeds.
Yeah. No, I'm remembering this all now as we're talking. I think I forgot about my own story. This is fun. Yeah, there's a whole nother journey there with snowboarding and delving into ecology.
Yeah.
So deep ecology was definitely a huge part of it.
Joanna Macy,
for sure. Joanna Macy. Gary Snyder, who I had the privilege of spending some time with. And academia too, which I appreciate to a point, but I think was pretty disenchanted by it actually the entire time, because I didn't have a good time in school growing up. I thought it was lame. I wanted to be running around outside. I loved engaging with students, and I loved like the rigorous investigation of information, but it's not embodied. And I just saw this in the entire field of education. It's like so much just waxing poetic about ideas in your brain at the coffee shop where it's real cozy, but not actually using our hands, not actually living side by side with the land or people, always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I think that's because of my parents, because of our exposure. We were around homeless people a lot with the Salvation Army. So yeah, I don't know how much more you want me to share about that. It goes on and on. The more I think about it, I'm like, man, there's other pieces of this story too. Yeah, I feel pretty lucky, I had pretty open-minded parents. Even though they were very Christian, they were always very encouraging and supportive to travel and learn about different people. Being in Colorado too, I got to be... From within a week of me moving to Colorado, I met some elders of the Ute tribe, and they invited me to a sweat lodge, and I ended up getting to learn a lot more about their relationship with the United States, which up until then, of course, I knew nothing about because school doesn't talk about it.
Yeah.
and what they were doing to the land. And we went to some protests out in Nevada about land rights, and I learned so much. And so that really seeded a lot of interest in indigenous culture and trying to be like, well, I don't think these people were just banging on rocks in a cave. They seem brilliant, and indeed they are and have been for a long time.
And the US is a place where today when we think of the US, we're not even thinking about the indigenous cultures and wisdoms yet.
Yeah.
As I navigate just even slightly, you just see actually how much deep wisdom there has been with relation to the land, as in Australia as well, and other colonized places. So I guess there's that treasure that's still there, as you said, it's still not gone, but maybe still there to be tapped.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never seen anything more heartbreaking than what has occurred to the Native American people. I mean, yeah, talk about 95% gone, just violently stripped away. Boarding schools, and it goes on and on. The language forbidden, the ritual forbidden, and violence. It happened very quickly, like in just a few. I mean, really. Yeah, I mean, 100 years, it's gone, but there is still that seed of culture there. And a lot of it actually does come from the actual seed, which is, we could go on and on about that, which is just fascinating. Like, seeds are powerful. And when we start eating our traditional foods, there's memory in there that's actually physically being fed to us, and our consciousness resonates with it. And it awakens dreams, it awakens understandings. Wow. Tangibly. And I don't know if we can actually open that can of worms. Some of it I don't know if I'm allowed to, but the point is like, remember who we are, get back intact, because it's not all dead, it's all there, and it behooves us to get back in alignment and right relation with it, with her.
Wow, I'm just soaking that in. That's memory in the seeds, and
for sure.
And it's
for sure.
And when we eat heirloom seeds,
yeah,
it's more than just. I mean, nutrition alone seems a good enough reason to eat the heirloom seeds and not something GMO. But this is even deeper on this journey of remembering.
Absolutely, and it has to do with more than just. I mean, the seeds is like number one, but also sound, also clothing, fabric, designs, it's all about conditions, right? Like, if you're familiar with Buddhism talks a lot about this, about you need like the right conditions for certain understandings to arise. And that's true in this context too. It's like, if there's enough conditions that your ancestral understanding knew present now, then that understanding is more likely to return. But if it's just saturated with all the noise of modernity, it's very unlikely.
This is a good segue into something you just mentioned a few times about intact cultures, living in right relation, which is something I've heard you speak about before. You can unpack for us, your understanding of what living in right relation means and why it's so integral to what you just mentioned about remembering and about reconnecting.
Yeah. Well, I guess you could compare it a bit to a lover. If you're not learning how to love what your lover loves, then it's all about you, and nothing's actually gonna happen. You're just mining. You're just taking what you want, manipulating the situation to like get your desired outcome.
Yeah.
That's not a relationship. That's business as usual. That's like modernity, that's what we do, You're like, I want to build a house there. I'm going to build a house there, and I'll blast through the mountain because I want a road there. This is the mindset. That's not going to result in your lover loving you. You might scare the shit out of them enough that they finally do your bidding, but they don't really love you. And to have a genuine, reciprocal relationship that's giving the kind of energy that's nourishing to life, there has to be a foundation in reciprocity, genuine mutual understanding. It's not efficient. It has nothing to do with kind of what most people are educated to think is important.
Yeah.
But it's the most important thing. You know, it's like to live in right relation is kind of the antithesis to what most of us are doing in the world right now. You know, most of us want our cake and eat it too. It's like, well, I like the farm, but the convenience of my life in the city, I think I don't want to give it up. Well, then business as usual.
Yeah.
We're still going to feed that culture. You know, doesn't mean we all have to be hardcore farmers, but there has to be an understanding of what does the earth want.
Mm-hmm.
And that needs to be higher than what you want. You know, okay, fair enough. You want to have, you know, your nice, you want your space, you know, most modern people, they want their space, you know, I want community, but I want to make sure I got my space.
Yeah, guilty.
You know, I mean, that's a product of modernity.
Yeah.
And we have to have the courage to look at that and peel back the layers and be like, well, what does Earth want? Earth doesn't have her space. You think the Earth likes all these, you know, ants digging at her skin all the time? Probably not. But she does it because it allows for the garden to grow. And so starting to see everything from the vantage point of the soil, from the vantage point of the flower, of the bee, this slowly puts us back in right relation. Otherwise, it's just about what we want, what I want, what's comfortable to me. It's not about this, you know, like my teacher Martin, he always is telling us, he's like, we are not here to get what we want. That's not why we're here.
Yeah. Who is that is wanting?
Yeah.
Yeah. As my teacher reminds me.
Yeah. But so that's a big part of trying to crack the riddle of what is right relation, you know. Well, it's got to be relational.
Yeah.
You just got to get away from what I want.
I mean, you said you wake up in the morning and you do a Surya Namaskar. You are saluting the sun. This sounds like something that would be the ritual of living in right relation, but perhaps also connecting on a deeper level.
Yeah, I think so. And trying to integrate that all the time, you know, like not just casually walking through the garden or past a tree in the middle of Bangkok. Like when you see that tree, stop and say hello. You know, just take a moment of pause and be like, I'm not the only one here. Like there's a million other species around here that want to grow. And yes, I want to make sure that I'm working hard for the benefit of oppressed peoples.
Yeah.
Also, remembering the oppressed soil beneath my feet. And like, am I working in a way that, you know, before we even get to the level of like learning to love and acknowledge that which the tree loves, we need to stop and even acknowledge that the tree is there, which in most cases we're not. We're just going right by. But returning to right relation is like step number one, you know, like, you know, all respect to so many people. You know, I was in this camp for a long time. You know, we're going to save the world by using, you know, I don't know, green energy or something like this. Tip of the iceberg, you know, that's not really right relation. Not if it's extracting and not even asking permission from the mountain to begin with, because green energy is still extraction. Yeah. You know, did you ask the mountain if it wanted to be extracted from? Well, we're too good to talk to the mountain and ask that. Okay, well, then we'll never get to where we need to go. You know, and that will look a million different ways because there's a million different ways of being human. And we don't need to get, you know, we have to be careful not to get all new agey and woo-woo about all this. But observing intact cultures that do, you know, here, you know, okay.
Yeah,
I mean, this is a big question.
Yeah, but I think you touched on this point of learning, and I guess, you know, we did this trip to the Pakanyong village, Hinnatnai, where they're living and learning a lot about their rituals. But your relationship with them started, many years before, and I guess you've been learning. Like how do we learn from, this light relation? How have you learned from indigenous communities?
Well, I think it's helpful when you have so as a new farmer. I mean, really, I'm new. I've only been working with land for 15 years. It's relatively new. Certainly wasn't part of my bloodline it was a long time ago, but this recognition of cross-pollination, and you observe it in the garden all the time, and the seeds that cross occasionally, not all the time. You have to have them maintain their own, but when they cross, they grow stronger. And I think that this is so important too. It's like a lot of these concepts aren't going to be understandable without cross-pollinating with the tone and mindset of modernity too. So I really have gained a lot from like Wade Davis. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's an interesting guy, and he shares this story, which I think would be helpful to your question. That he comes from Canada, and he's worked with a lot of different peoples around the world, and he's like, the thing is like, it doesn't matter if you believe that or he doesn't say that. I think it does matter. He probably would say that too. But the interesting thing to observe is if you go into this mountain range with the mindset that everything is dead, that it's nothing but resources to extract so that I can build a big house, what is the outcome? If you enter into this mountain, like, the people where he comes from in Canada, I'm not sure what people that is now, forgive me, but he's like, they enter recognizing that this is the abode of their many different deities of their peoples and land, and they have all these rituals, and because of their mythology, they won't cut anything down, which is similar in the Bakayon. There's a certain spot in that mountain range we visited where they'll never go, because that's the abode of the gods. They don't view it as resources. They view it as an abode of some spiritual forces. Okay, the modern, advanced mind is going to be like, oh, there's no God there.
That's backwards.
That's backwards rubbish thinking.
Yeah.
What's the outcome? The highbrow, educated, modern man. Outcome is polluted water. It's dead land. It's polluted air. What we got all around us right now.
Yeah.
The outcome of the mythological brain, clean water. So we can talk all day about, like, is it true or not that, like, should I feed the sun? Should I, that to me is besides the point. We should look at what is the outcome.
Yeah.
What's actually happening. Mythological alignments, intact cultures that revere all life as alive, conscious, vibrant, worthy of relationship, result in clean water, result in clean soil. I'm not aware of an exception to that rule. So I think that's digestible to someone who's not entered into this space before. It's just very concrete, and you can see it again and again. You see it where we went in Chiang Rai. Yeah. If we were able to, like, take a drone and, like, look at that forest where we were from overhead, you would see right away what is the education of this spot? What is the education of this spot? Very obvious.
Because a lot of that forest had been deforested for decades, and they played a role in the regeneration of the forest.
Yeah, and continues to be. Or if it's being managed, it's being managed in, like, the modern way, which is not wild. It's still essentially, it's borderline monocrop. You got a few select trees that you think are important.
Yeah.
Again,
the human mind deciding what's the most efficient, rather than maybe listening to the land or to the people that live there.
Totally.
But we said 95% seeds being lost. I don't know how many intact people are left. Like, where do we, when you see the world, where do you see the pockets of intact people? I've been in Thailand for now 2.5 years, and it's only recently, due to my own curiosity, that I've started to, and thanks to you and others, I've started to find more of people who might be living in right relation. Like, where do you see the state of the world from this perspective?
Not to get too grim, but I would say it's over. It's done.
Okay.
But because of...
So it's worse than the 95% even.
Probably.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I mean, even where we were, there's still, you know, that way is slipping away right before our eyes, you know. But within us, again, going back to that you know, like when we were talking about the actual seeds, the genetic code that inspired all of life, which is not separate, I don't think, you know, or at least it's in close relationship to that which brought forth the wisdom that all these peoples had before, you know, whatever you want to call it, modernity or whatever, took it away, distracted us.
Yeah.
It's still there.
Yeah.
You know, and so it can come back.
Yeah.
And it will come back. I have full faith in that. But, you know, I don't think you can't go find it, because just the act of finding it, it's like, what are you going to do when you find them? You kill them, you know, because you come in and, like, this is, you know, going back to my trip on academia and why I sometimes jokingly, not jokingly, I don't know, refer to myself as a recovering academic, or
Like that.
I don't know, an educational hitman, because I thought, like, oh, this is the way we're going to save the world with education. But that education was killing everything, you know? And so I would say it's not a good idea to go find these people. If they're even there, just let them be.
Yeah.
And let it inspire that curiosity in you that can help you retrace the steps to regenerating the vision that's our birthright. That's always there. It's just been clouded, you know, so that we can, you know, not do it again, but do it in the right way. Because things are always changing, you know. That's the nature of things.
I want to maybe just to end this thread a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit about technology. It's close to me because a lot of my work has to do with working with technologists, trying to understand this thing called technology and its impact on us. But central it is to the assumption that technology is just better for us, and a life without technology is not something that we want. I don't even want to go that deep, but I'm struck by you mentioning a lot of times the story you shared with me. You said you had permission to, you know, taking something from nature, whether it's you're plucking, harvesting, there's like permission, there's a reciprocity you mentioned.
Yeah.
So much of our technology systems today, the hardware or even the software is running on hardware essentially, and it's, you know, built on extraction of nature, of resources. In some sense, technology, I still feel technology has to be part of the solution. You know, I think what does Buddhism say? You thorn to remove a thorn. You know, there's this, I can't come to the feeling that technology has to be outright rejected. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you enabled by technology. Yet, as you mentioned, like there's so much extraction that's happened. How do we bring some certain level of reciprocity back? What do we need to acknowledge in terms of what's been taken, what's been harmed? How do you, I mean, I know it's too much to like wrap around in a very short conversation, but just what comes up to you?
Oh man, so much. I think the first thing is grief.
Yeah.
Like, at some point we have to come to terms with what we've done. I remember having a powerful, you know, transcendental moment once when I was like, I don't know, I was quite young actually. I think I was only like 16 or something. I was flying, you know, across the United States, and looking out the window, and just, you know, from a higher vantage, you're like, oh my God, the entire landscape is totally wrecked. And it just shattered me. And I felt this enormous grief that was bigger than anything I'd felt before. It wasn't like this, you know, oh, woe is me, I'm not getting what I want. Like, that's not grief. That's just like privileged bullshit, you know, that everyone's like, oh no, you know, this whole thing going on in America right now, make America great again, because I'm not like, I want white power again. You know, that's not grief. But the grief, the deep, like, sacred recognition of, like, the story we told, Like when Raggedy Boy realizes he forgot about the mother. And like, I remember feeling that so deeply. I was just like, and also it was like there was these layers of awareness that were happening. I can return to it right now. It's amazing. Where I was like aware of my awareness at that moment of like, this awareness is important. Like this is fuel for beauty making, for culture making, for like maturity, for growing up in a culture that doesn't instruct youth how to become adults. It's like, this is what it is. Like, and I don't have a lot of evidence for that because I come from an orphan culture. We don't have elders. We're just winging it. But I feel strongly about that a part of initiation comes from that awareness of sacred grief. And like, until we like collectively, individually enter into that, I don't think we can get very far. Like there has to be this awareness, like we mined the whole damn mountain. There's nothing left. And like, you have to be wrecked because you need to be humble and start to be like, oh my God, we've got to save that 5% no matter what. And then we can have all these conversations about like, oh, but is there a place for technology? Well, you know, nothing's black or white. You know, I'm pretty convinced ancient civilizations had technology. It was all wiped out because of wrong relation and other variables. But yes, but you need to do it with reciprocity being at the core. Like I don't even know if you were aware you were doing it, but I was so honored that you did that and thankful right at the beginning of our conversation when you honored the equipment we're using. This sort of thing is important because you need to like have a consistent awareness of what you're dealing with. This is not just a phone. This is filled with like seriously precious minerals that have been violently extracted and people have died. A lot of children, a lot of families' lives completely ruined. And yet I just casually walk around. I'm going to get an upgrade next year. It's like there has to be a strong foundational awareness of what we're working with. And with that, there's grief. And this is so common in a lot of, the Bakayon where we went together. You might remember their word for earth is the crying place. And like this is in their language a lot. There's this recognition that, you know, when you take something from nature, whether it's a plant or a mineral or, you know, you're extracting iron ore or whatever, there has to be grieving because you're killing the mother. You're harming her. And there has to be an honoring of that, an exaltation, a deification of what's happening. Otherwise, it's just, again, business as usual. And there's no reciprocity. There's no honoring. And honoring, you know, in the modern world too, we don't really care much about that anymore. But that plays a serious, significant role in making mature adults, which we don't have much of now. Because none of that matters. Like, oh, you're wasting time.
Initiation. This.
That stuff does matter. You know.
What is initiation? Just, I know it's a big one. Another big one. We're tackling a lot of big things, but
I mean, in a nutshell, which it shouldn't be discussed in a nutshell. So forgive me to all my teachers and all the people who have rightly done this for thousands of years. It's just an honorable, skillful, communally held, intergenerationally recognized method for making, again, to reference my teacher's words, elders worthy of descending from, which we're not doing now. We're just, the whole goal is to get what you want, and that's it.
I mean, the closest we come is like high school degrees and university degrees.
Yeah, and you like walk across the stage and like, there's your big moment.
Yeah.
You get a picture with the king or whatever, you know. But to die and be reborn, that's kind of initiation. And historically, it was, you might die. Initiations were no joke. They weren't some simple ordeal. It was like, either you live or you don't. And if you do live, you will be different than you were. And we will be able to trust that you're able to care for the children, which is a whole other conversation.
I hear of Tyson Yunkuputra in Sand Talk when he talks about how the first peoples in Australia, they've had ways to prevent narcissists. And he sort of pins this idea of like narcissism as being the root almost of how everything's go wrong, because an initiation maybe is ways where the narcissism gets removed and
Right.
you die and you're reborn.
Yeah. You realize it's not about you. It's not about you. In every fiber of your being, like a proper initiation, as I have heard. I haven't experienced, sadly, and I really hope my daughter might be able to get a glimpse of it, or at least her grandchildren. But what I believe is like an appropriate initiation, done well, shatters any ability to see things differently. Like every fiber of your being, your foundational understanding, always, every hour of the day is, this is not about me. As long as it's about you, you're not initiated.
And I want to surface here because I think it's important, is that, you know, when sometimes people hear it's not about me, or hear grief, there's this resistance,
Right.
being like, what do you mean it's not about me? What are you trying to take away from me? What are you trying to brainwash me? But behind a lot of this is connecting to joy as well. And
Absolutely.
And that is the core of what this is all about, fundamentally.
Absolutely. That's a really important point, because, I mean, then you have a capacity for joy that's just not accessible if you don't live that way.
Today we're living in all about me with my phone and my apps and social media and everything that I can get catered to me, personalized algorithms and ordering what I want online. But I don't think most of us are very satisfied.
Oh, clearly.
And like while we're struggling and we're trying to come out of this malaise, but this initiation seems so strikingly important here.
Yeah, absolutely. And talk about grief.
Yeah.
That one really hits hard with me as a father. Like the realization of how far we've come from, an intact space that knows how to initiate, and probably more importantly, to welcome the initiate home.
So I'll pause the conversation here. Next week, we'll dive right where we left off, going into eco-villages and how the role that eco-villages might play into initiation, into helping us live more into right relation, into helping us remember. We'll also learn more into Greg's own journey and the decisions he's made into the life that he lives today. So thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast. Would love it if you could leave a rating or leave a comment. It really helps podcast increase its visibility among the world of algorithms and platforms. So thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week ahead. Thank you and goodbye.